Hi there and welcome to a new episode of Extreme Banding, the slow YouTube camera channel dealing with various photographic nightmares. I am living in one of them right now, December in the north of Sweden. Weather is so-so and the sun never rises. There's no time or place for photography, so what can you do? Think about which all-mechanical rangefinder camera with a cost below 1,000 euros you would like to use for the rest of your life, perhaps. Hello again and welcome to another episode of Extreme Banding. In this series we have compared the Barnack design with other rangefinder cameras. It has also numerous times been mentioned that the market turned away from rangefinder cameras when 35mm SLRs became available. Why then would anyone want to use a rangefinder today? This is something we will investigate in this video. And what better SLR to compare the Barnack to than the Zenit-C, the Barnack, with a mirror box. The development of 35mm SLRs started in the 30s with the German Kine Exacta and the Soviet Goms Sport. But the eye-level pentaprism and SLR look as we know it came about in the late 40s with the Italian Rectaflex and East German Contax S. At the KMZ plant in the Soviet Union, production of Zorki Barnack copies was in full swing, and what better way was there to make an SLR than to take a Zorki and put a mirror box on it? The resulting camera was the Zenit or Zenit-1 in 1952. This is a Zenit-C from 1956, where the C, which is the Cyrillic counterpart of the Roman alphabet's S, stands for flash sync. So as far as I know, this is the only addition from the original camera. As a copy, as it is actually a Zorki or Leica 2 Model D copy from the beginning. It is of course a bottom loader and it has the same basic shutter mechanism and everything. It also has the dimensions of early Barnacks with 133mm width and 30mm thickness. The height is increased to about 9 centimeters and weight is about 520 grams. The lens mount was kept the same, an M39 screw mount, but the flange focal distance had to be changed because of the mirror box, and so it moved about 16 millimeters out from the camera body. The lens selection is quite limited for these cameras. Later on the Soviets went for the M42 screw mount. But there are some nice lenses for it, such as the Mir-1 Helios 44, the nicest version of it, and Jupiter 9 for example. Soviet lenses with an A, like this Mir-1A, have a switchable mount. You can switch them between M42 and M39, like the Tamron Adapt All system, you could say. Well, back to the actual camera then. It has a knob wind as well as a knob rewind. The speed dial is rotating, but it has the later style type where you lift it up so you can see what speed you have set before and after winding the shutter. And this early SLR does not have an instant return mirror, so the image blacks out after releasing the shutter. You could say that this encourages you to find something new to photograph. True to its Barnack legacy, this camera is very nice in hand. Your fingers have a little less place because of the lens mount, but otherwise it is almost like holding a Barnack with a little more weight. As you have to pull up the mirror, the knob wind has more resistance than on the Barnack. So a winding lever, like on the following Zenit camera, the Zenit-3, is something you'd probably want in an SLR. A bigger camera then? Well, that depends on how you view it. The Zenit could be said to have a universal finder, as it changes view along with the lens like all SLRs, and therefore it would probably be fair to compare it to a FED or Zorki with a universal finder. Here's the FED one with the KMZ universal finder. And as you can see, this makes the FED clearly taller than the Zenit, and with about 90 grams added, it becomes almost as heavy as this one at 500 grams. A small finder makes it as tall, but overall smaller and lighter. But when switching lenses, you'd have to switch this out. And of course, with rangefinders, you don't see exactly what the lens sees. So you have parallax correction problems and so on. And back to the viewfinder, because the biggest difference between these cameras is, of course, the viewfinder experience. So let's have a look at that. Here's the viewfinder of the Zenit-C then. It has a very nice viewfinder, as you can see, very, very big. And it is one of my favorite viewfinders from SLRs. The view is about 1.1 times magnified with a 50mm lens. So the magnification is very, very high. Makes focusing easier, but the drawback is that coverage is quite low. You see maybe 85% of what the lens sees. The advantage of that is that while magnification is high, the eye point is still good. And moreover, the view is quite charming, like looking at an old TV screen. There is some distortion, but I think that is okay. Of course, with a SLR you see how the lens breathes when you focus in and out. So you don't have to worry about that factor when being up close. As you can see, there are no focusing aids. The contrast is very good though, so focusing is easy. It is also possible to focus when stopping down the lens, as well as seeing the depth of field in a good way, even though the view gets darker. So here's at f3.5 with the Industar, and as we stop down you can see how much darker it gets. So if we put the ISO to auto, it will compensate for this, so you can just see the difference in depth of field. Here we are at f16. There, back at f3.5, and as you can see, it is quite a bit easier to focus when depth of field is a bit shorter. Personally, I'm not a fan of focusing aids like split screens or the like. I do not think they are faster than a good matte screen, and I don't think they are more accurate, and they also black out when using a slow lens or stopping down. They are of course fully usable. Some people prefer them. Personally, I find them more distracting than helpful. Seeing through the lens helps the composition in the final image, and the view is quite beautiful compared to the flat view or rangefinder camera. Now we have switched to the Helios 44 for shorter depth of field, more bokeh. And this, I would say, is also the weakness of SLRs, depending on what photos you want to make. If I see this, I get pretty drawn to short depth of field, as it is so pretty. And I have to concentrate to focus properly. I get very focused on the things that are in the focus plane, and a bit distracted when thinking about the image as a whole. With a rangefinder, it is quite the opposite. Focusing is very easy, non-obtrusive, and I see all of the image with the same focus. But of course that's just personal and depends on what type of photography you want to do and what you feel aids you in doing that. On rangefinders, all lenses are similarly easy to focus. On SLRs, it depends on how bright they are. Lenses with more contrast are easier to focus than those with low contrast. Short depth of field helps with focusing as you see what's in focus. So wide angle lenses, especially with slow speeds and low contrast, are really difficult to focus manually on SLRs. And here's the viewfinder of the Canon EOS 3000V from the early 2000s with autofocus. And as you can see, the viewfinder is quite a bit smaller, brighter, and shows less depth of field, even though it's the Helios 44 f2 lens. So what they did when autofocus came about, mostly slow zoom lenses were standard, and this is true for DSLRs as well. They changed the focusing screens to a type which is brighter but shows less depth of field. So I'm turning the aperture now, and here something happens. Between 2 and 2.8 nothing happens. Not regarding depth of field, not regarding brightness. They are just not possible to focus accurately at fast speeds. At f2.8 and slower they are okay, or f3.5 at least. And I think that's why people think that fast lenses are difficult to manually focus, as they are pretty impossible to focus on late SLR or DSLR's standard focusing screens. Autofocusing works fine though, but that is a different story. So this is how it looks. Coverage is about 90%. So a cleaner view, and with the Industar 50 it's, works just fine. The Helios 44 focusing on f2 is pretty much just focusing by chance within the f2.8 range. And here's the viewfinder of the modern Canon 5D Mark III with a custom matte screen which shows true depth of field. It gets darker than the standard one when stopping down though, but this is 2 to 2.8, so you have an effect immediately. Better for manually focusing than the standard. Coverage is 100% and the viewfinder at 50mm is 0.71. This is a 58mm lens, so magnification is a bit higher. Here's the humble view of the Leica M3. And as you can see, you have full depth of field, same brightness with every lens, and focusing is just extremely easy and extremely accurate. Well, there you have it. Rangefinders and SLRs for focusing. That's the difference in finder experience. But there is also one more important aspect, and that is regarding the lenses. As you can see, this Industar 50 on the Zenit, or on this Canon for that part, makes the camera very small. There is a rigid version for rangefinders that sticks out as long as on this SLR. Here's the collapsible version, and it has the same design, so the same length. And as you can see, they have the same difference front to back now, but of course, as this has no mirror, you can collapse it and thereby make it a lot more compact when you're not taking photos. As lenses can protrude deeper into rangefinder cameras, they also have to stick out less in front. This is especially true for wide-angle lenses. You can find very small ones on rangefinder cameras. This is a 20mm lens. It is very discreet. Or we could take this iceberg lens, the Jupiter 12, which is not the smallest 35mm lens there are. The Elmar 35 is like a collapsed Industar 50. But if you compare a 35mm lens on this rangefinder camera and on this Zenit 3, the difference is obvious. Of course, there are pretty small ones on SLRs as well, but wide-angle lenses are usually quite big. I mean, if you compare the Zenit-C with the Industar 50, which is about as small as it gets, and then you have the Canon P with this 28mm lens, and it doesn't stick out much more than the actual lens mount does on this one. Some of the small lenses on rangefinders are quite slow though, but that is also an advantage of rangefinders. As you do not see through the lens, a slow speed won't affect your view. A slow lens on an SLR, on the other hand, makes the view very, very dark. As I've already mentioned, focus shift that affects rangefinder cameras will also affect SLR lenses as badly if you do not stop down for focusing, which often does not happen with SLRs, since you are then impaired by darkness. As we have it here at the other end of the SLR timeline, released in 2003, the Canon 3000V or Rebel K2 or Kiss Lite. This camera, very different from this one, but with the same lens mounted, kinda the same size. It is also a true bargain. You can get them almost for free. And it has autofocus, built-in flash, auto film loading. You just stick the film in here, close the door, and it winds on. You have access to the enormous range of Canon EF lenses, and you can adapt a lot of other glass to it as well. It is small and it is light. The lightest in the so-called Canon Rebel or Kiss lineup, measuring 130 x 88 x 64 and weighing a mere 340 grams. If you equip it with something like this Industar 50, it is difficult to find something smaller, and as the fastest f-stop of this lens is f3.5, you can focus it accurately too. The camera is of course battery dependent and has this special camera battery. And the downsides of modernity is the plasticky feel, the electronic film winding sound. You won't hear it now because of course the battery ran out and I won't buy another one. It also has a very electronic shutter sound and it draws a bit of power, so you have to swap batteries now and again. And the batteries cost a bit too. So even if you find the camera for cheap, it might cost you more than you planned initially. And you have this issue that you pick it out and you plan to go shooting, but then you have no battery and it's not that easy to find the batteries. So you might have to order it and so on. You have to plan a bit. That's the price to pay for some of its features as well. But I would say if you're into that kind of camera, I think the Canon 3000V is, well, you could do a lot worse. Back to what this episode was all about. We've gone through the basic differences. And I would say that rangefinders have an advantage when it comes to size, especially when you count lenses in. Also has an advantage when it comes to manual focusing, at least with wide and slow lenses. For my use, I see rangefinders as the perfect tool for manual focus photography, especially at the wide end with long depth of field where composition of the image is the priority. I do prefer rangefinder focusing over every other focusing system in existence though, as it is just so very fast and non-distracting, while allowing you a sense of control that autofocus does not, for example. At least that's how it is for me. I do prefer SLRs for longer focal lengths though, and sometimes for portraits. I mean, I still like SLRs, especially the ones with nice finders. As the photography world as a whole was dominated by SLRs from the 60s and 50 years onwards, there are of course an abundance of wonderful cameras to choose from. In many ways though, if you want something charming that is nice in hand, you could just have a look at the Zenit-C, the SLR-Barnack.